change my slides. Yes, I'll do it. Hi, everyone. This is Jerri Barrett. Welcome to Global Tech Women and Building a Resume with Impact. I'm actually here. You can't see her, but I am with Deanna Kosaraju, who is on hour 39 or something like that. So she's been up for a couple of days. Anyway, welcome to, as I said, Building a Resume with Impact. To give you a little bit of background on why I'm doing this, uh, for the last 27 years, I've been doing marketing and public relations work. For the last year, I've been working on, actually, no, for the last 5 months, sorry, I've been the vice president of outreach for an organization called SENS Research Foundation. And SENS Research Foundation is a nonprofit that focuses on curing the diseases of aging. So I'm actually taking a huge step back in my life, back to my roots as a biologist. But throughout the last 27 years, one of the things I've really done a lot of is job hunting, as you can imagine. You know, you can only stay in one job for so long. And I've attended a lot of classes and workshops on resume writing. I've run a lot of classes and workshops on it. And I really welcome the opportunity today to meet with all of you to talk about what I've learned and answer any questions you have. So as I'm talking, please feel free to jump in and ask a question. So you should all be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm moving on to slide number 2. And what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about as you create your resume, how you define who you are, understanding the job you want. These are two of the most critical aspects when you are creating a resume. Um, Walk through how to build a high impact resume, and then talk a little bit about after the resume. What are some of the other things that you now need to do that we probably didn't have to do 27 years ago? Things like LinkedIn profiles, but we'll also talk a little bit about cover letters and references. So onwards. The slide that you're looking at, when you look at slide number 3, was my attempt at defining myself. And when you think about defining yourself for a resume, you're really looking at all of the attributes of all the things that you've done in your life and figuring out how you're defining yourself for this specific resume. So if you, for example, as you look at the resume or as you look at this slide, what you'll see is, you know, I went to the University of Rochester and got my MBA. I went to Mount Holyoke College as an undergraduate. I was a biology major, which hasn't been something I've really played up a lot. But in getting my current job, it actually made a huge difference that I had been, in fact, a biology major. And when I was recruited for this job, one of the things that came up was the fact that I had had a job right after college as a research biochemist, but I had never referred to it. I haven't referred to it on my resume in probably the last 20 years, 15 years since getting my MBA. But suddenly it became relevant again, and I actually had to reinsert it into my resume. So again, there are all these aspects of your life and your past life that you need to really look at as you're building a resume. You'll see I have a cute picture of my cute little dog who, if at some point in this, he may leap upon my lap because he's sitting right next to me. He's not relevant to my resume. And I do want people to think about that because I've seen some resumes when I've been doing some resume editing. I've actually found myself arguing with people about including things that aren't relevant to actually working on a job. And they're things that can actually possibly give an employer pause. For example, I've had people who put how many children they have on their resume. It's not actually relevant to finding the position. It's not something you should include. And while, as we all know, it's completely illegal to consider that, it is something that if it's on your resume, someone may consider and they may say, wow, she has 3 kids. You know, I need somebody who can be truly dedicated to the job, and she's putting this on her resume. So it may be something that, you know, she's stating she's putting as a priority. So it's just something to think about, is making sure that what you put on your resume how you're defining yourself, making sure that that's completely relevant. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about resumes. So your resume itself is marketing collateral. So like I said, I've been doing marketing for 27 years, hard to imagine. But the thing that is really important is when you're creating collateral, when you're creating materials that you're giving to someone, and for any product, you need to make sure that it's the best collateral you can give them, that it's relevant, that it's impactful, that it's clearly conveying what's happening with the product. So, and again, you're the product in this case. The resume is the thing that represents you. Now, I will say, and this is foreshadowing just a little bit, but I will say that the thing to think about, I've had people say to me, I don't need a resume anymore because I have LinkedIn. I don't believe that to be true at all. You absolutely have to have a resume, because if you're giving someone your LinkedIn and you're saying, oh, go look at this. Well, I know at companies that I've talked to, and actually my last experience, which was basically in October in my job hunting process, one of the things that happened is, they came to me through LinkedIn. They found me there. So having a complete LinkedIn profile was a great idea. The only negative side would have been if I hadn't had a resume, they wouldn't have been able to hand it to people. So literally, when I walked in for my interviews, I had someone say to me, oh my God, they didn't give me your resume, and just sort of look at me. If I had only had a LinkedIn, I would have been totally screwed, quite honestly. But instead, I was able to pull my clean resume out of my bag, hand it to him, so he could look at it. So it is important to have that physical piece of collateral with you. Um, your resume always has to represent you and the best possible person you are. One of the things I've seen people doing is they've actually included in their resume negatives about themselves, which is crazy. So don't do that. But I've also seen people do things in a resume like put a statement, and this is honestly true. I've edited a lot of resumes. I had someone put in a statement about why the company they worked for had gone out of business. So they could sort of say, yes, I worked for this company, but it went out of business and it really wasn't my fault, but blah, 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 blah. Like, no, no, no. What you're putting in is the best about you as an individual. You don't have to include things about the company. They're going to assume it's a real company. They'll probably Google it if they've not heard of it. But, don't include the extraneous negative. This does not need to include every detail or every facet of your life. For someone like me who's a marketing person, if I say I know how to do press releases and I say it in every single, or I did press releases in every single job, that's redundant and not something they necessarily need to know. So when you're building your resume, really think about the impact you've had on an organization, what contribution you've made to it, and what work you did that positively advanced a company. Even if it is a company that went out of business, you did have a positive impact. I can honestly say I've had 2 companies go out of business that I worked for. One because the product wouldn't work. So, these things happen. And that's not something I focus on my resume at all. Instead, what I talk about is, hey, I launched the company and here's the press coverage I got. Here's the impact that it had, the positive impact it had. I don't dwell on the negative. The other thing about marketing collateral, and especially ads and all those things, is you don't want to advertise something you don't want to have to do again. So I actually did some Yellow Page sales at one point, and I was helping a company build an ad, and I said, oh, so I see the thing that you really love to do is this. And the person said, no, I hate doing that. It doesn't make me any money. It's my low profit thing. And I said, but it's like the headline of your ad. Your ad states this is the most important thing that you want to do the most. And they went, no, no, I never want to do that again. And I said, well, then we should take it out. So this is something to think about with your resume as you're creating it and moving forward. Really look at your resume, make sure it says what you want to be doing. A good example from my past is I was actually a corporate manager of learning and training. And in the course of a year, I trained 7,000 people. I never want to do that again. That was exhausting. It was like the worst job ever. All I did was travel. So I've taken that out of my resume. Now, if it were my immediately preceding job and that's all I'd done, I'd have to consider how to position it. But seriously, if there's things you don't like doing, don't include them in your resume. Um, and the final thing about your resume is it really needs to sell you to a hiring manager. And that's what we'll be talking about as we move through this process. A hiring manager is looking for very specific things, and your resume is supposed to be designed and should be designed to sell you to that hiring manager. So if you go to slide 5, um, understanding the job you want is critical in creating a resume and a LinkedIn profile. It's really a summary of everything you want to be doing. If you don't, or it's a summary of everything you want to be doing, but it shouldn't be a summary of everything you've ever done. So one of the challenges I think people are having these days, especially someone who's been unemployed for a while, and I have several friends who've gone through this, is you become kind of more desperate and more eager to get a job. And the challenge that you're facing as you're job hunting is, if you let your resume become completely unfocused, people aren't going to really believe you want that job. You want to make sure that you're always focused on the job that you're applying for. So the first step really is identifying the job or a category of jobs that you're interested in. So for a marketing person, sorry to keep using marketing examples, but that's what I've done. I can look at, being a director of marketing, a VP of marketing, a product marketing position, etc. If you're doing purchasing, you'd be a VP of purchasing, a director of purchasing, etc. There's training managers, there's product management people, there's developers, there's all these different kinds of jobs. You need to really figure out what job you want, but all the other things that it could be called. You don't want to use a language that's very specific to one single job type. Uh, I think the best example I can give is I was working with someone who was job hunting, and the job that he wanted, or the job he really wanted, I actually searched for a day in various databases and search engines. I could only find 2 jobs with that title in the entire country. There literally was no job with that specific title that people were advertising for. He had over limited the jobs. So we had to go back and really rework not only his search strategy, but also his resume, because we needed to loosen it up a bit. If you're looking at a job and it's the director of supreme excellence, and there's only one job like that in the whole country, it's not going to be easy to find that job or get that job. But finding a job that's a director of operations, a director of optimization, a director of quality assurance, a director of quality, those are the things that you need to be considering. So on the next slide, um, this is an example of a job description that you can find online. So what we're looking at, I'm not sure you can see it as easily, but these were this was from a single job, and it's all of the things that someone was looking for who was hiring for this position. So I'm actually looking at it going, so it was really, it was kind of an HR based position. And a couple of things about reading these job descriptions is, people tend to put the most important things on top. So you really need to look through this. When you're looking at job descriptions, when you're creating a resume, go and get 20 or 30 job descriptions and really sit down and look at them. So if you look at slide 7, actually, I may jump ahead. Slide 8. When you're looking at the job description, really look at what I call this keyword identification, but really take a look at what people are describing that they're looking for. So for example, in this one, in the first line, minimum of 15 years strategic staffing management experience. So this is a real job description that someone I knew was applying for, and she had no strategic staffing or staffing management experience at all. It was unbelievable. And I'll be really honest, this was someone I couldn't really work with for very long because literally they were looking for, they were looking for a job that they were trying for a job that they were completely not qualified for. And she kept saying, but I have all this other experience that'll be relevant. And I said, but they really need someone who's a specialist in strategic staffing. So what I recommend that people do is gather as many job descriptions. Go to Craigslist, go to any one of 100 job sites. Definitely go to Monster. They have huge, databases of job descriptions. Go take a look on LinkedIn in their jobs. Take a look at all of these jobs and go through and highlight what are the key words, what are the words that people are using in these jobs. Making sure that these match what you have in your resume is critically important, but also making sure that these are jobs you're qualified to do. So in this case, when I'm looking at the keyword identification, and I'm actually going to take a step back to the previous one and just point out, identifying requirements in order of priority are really key, and looking at the keywords, from the job descriptions. And going back to this, the keywords are the words you need to be building into your resume. So in this case, saying words like strategic staffing and staffing management, if that's the kind of job you want, they may be calling it a director of HR. If you look at strategic staffing, what you should do is, with strategic staffing, is make sure that you have that within your resume, because as people are searching resume databases, those are the keywords they're going to be searching for. Um, Analytic and metric-based skills, being able to, first of all, know what those are and being able to say, yes, I have these, and using them in an example or using them in your overview and summary is a great idea. I thought what was really interesting in this job description, that I hadn't seen, was apolitical creative problem solving. Um, this told me when I read it that these people were hiring to solve a specific problem they'd had with a previous person in that role. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, I'm apolitical in my resume, but you might want to look at a keyword that you could use as, out of the box creative problem solver, able to work across different teams or groups. So again, going through all of these descriptions and picking through and pulling all of these keywords out to incorporate them into your resume, but also to incorporate them into your vocabulary, is going to become a very critical thing. Okay, so next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the resume itself. You want to put, and this is going to sound crazy, but I've seen so many people save their resume with crazy formats. They send it to me in a dot, let's see, I'm trying to think of what's not a dot, like a dot text, for example. No. It should be in a dot doc, or you should save it as a PDF. But you should name your resume as your first name underscore last name underscore resume, and then put a date on it. One of the key reasons to put a date on it is also so that they know that's the date you're basically submitting the resume. And it also helps you keep track of what's going on with resumes. So I always just make sure that I save my resume with my name, my full name. I've actually had people save their resume and have it as the name of the job they're applying for, which makes it extremely tough to keep track of. In the footer, it's also good to embed the first name, last name, resume. So Jerri Barrett's resume, page 1 of something. So the important reason to do that is that I actually once had a resume that I submitted, and the person came back to me and they said, wow, we're really interested. It's a shame you didn't go to college. And I went, I have an MBA. They had only gotten the first page of my 2-page resume. So it is really important to make sure that you say at the bottom, page 1 of 2. Use a clean, clear font. We once had someone submit a resume and there was yellow highlighting throughout the resume. Um, and so the important thing, she literally highlighted the resume, but it was kind of random. So it's kind of a good idea not to do yellow highlighting. As a good friend of mine said after she read the resume, we can't even interview this person because she's already made me crazy. So don't use yellow highlighting. Don't use crazy italic fonts. Don't do it in some weird thing that makes it really hard to read. That's a terrible thing. Um, I also recommend keeping your resume to 2 pages. I actually surveyed a group of recruiters that I was doing a panel with at one point, and they to a person said, keep your resume to 2 pages. Like a longer resume doesn't help. It just makes it harder to read. I will say the one exception for this is an academic resume where you need to have all of your publications. But in academic resume, there's an expectation of that. For general business, a 2 page resume should be plenty. If you look at slide 10, very simple at the top of the page, first name, last name, email address, and phone number. The thing I recommend is if you're applying to a company that actually provides email services, set up an email account with that company. So for example, don't apply to a job at Yahoo using your Gmail account. Um, doesn't look good and they don't like it, basically. With the phone number, my recommendation is to use your cell phone or to use your cell phone that you answer. Do not put a work telephone number. I don't know why anyone would do that, but people do. And do not put your home number if your home number is being answered by any of your children. People do call. I had a very last minute thing that came up while I was actually interviewing for the job I have now. Another job came out. That woman actually called me while I was out walking my dog. And I actually started the interview process with her while I was out. But I was very glad that it wasn't going to my home phone where I wasn't going to be for like 7 hours. So I wouldn't have been able to call her till the next day. So it's really critical to be careful about what phones. You also don't want it to be answered by someone, like a teenager who's going to say, yeah, what, all that. No, no, no. All right, onwards. Page 11. You want to make sure with your contact information, and I know this is a lot of detail on contact information, but it's funny how we overlook some of the very basics. Make sure that your name matches the name you're using on your LinkedIn page. I actually do not use my real legal name anywhere. Jerri is short for something I don't like to talk about. And so it's very important that Jerri Barrett matches the Jerri Barrett on LinkedIn, that you don't have your LinkedIn under your maiden name, but you're now using your married name somewhere. If you're doing any kind of marketing or writing, etc., you could put your blog or Twitter handle, but you might want to put that at the end of the resume, not right at the top. In an additional information section. We already talked about the email, which is always fun. If you can make your email address something like your first name underscore or dot last name at Gmail or whatever you're using. I will say people forget that sometimes you set up your email 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and it's got some craziness to it. I have some email accounts that I would never use for job hunting. Um, I will also say don't use multiple phone numbers or multiple email addresses. One of the things that can do is then I've actually had people submit resumes like that. And I've just looked at them and go, I don't know how to get in touch with this person. Like, oh, which one am I supposed to use? Your goal is always to make everything easy for the recruiter. I will say the important thing is don't include your address. It's not safe. Your resume is going to end up on the internet, and you don't want to be announcing that you're looking for a job and that you might be home alone, or just announcing your address on the internet. Just not a good idea. Okay, career summary. This is the thing that I think people have the greatest challenge with in creating resumes. A career summary is a very short paragraph at the very top of your resume that is basically summarizing who you are, what you do, and what you're good at. It is not a place to say, I am looking for a job as a marketing person. You don't need to say that because you're already applying for that job. So, putting that kind of specific, people call them objectives, and often put very hazy information like, oh, I'm looking for a fulfilling job in marketing. Well, yeah, we're all looking for a fulfilling job in marketing. We're all looking for a fulfilling job as a technical woman. We're all looking, these are all things we're all looking for. What we know that you're applying for that job or you're posting for that job somewhere. What you want to do here is put a very specific career summary that says, well, and this is actually, I'm looking at this to check, but this looks a lot like what I've used before. And this is where those keywords come in. Once again, so I say, you're experienced. You may want to say you're an experienced executive. You want to say you're an experienced programmer. Um, you want to use sort of the generic term that you pulled from all those job descriptions. So are you an executive? Are you a manager? Are you a leader? Et cetera, with a track record of success. You always want to say you've been a success. In what kind of organization you want to go work for. You don't want to put a limiter on it, like you only want to work at a high-tech company that's doing, chip manufacturing. You want to, make it broad enough, so you can say, but you can say things like experienced in startups if you really want to work in a startup and you have worked in those. Um, and then you can list some of your expertise. There's a lot of debate. I've got people who insist on having just lists, bulleted lists of different characteristics. I think that takes up a lot of room. Um, so I don't always recommend it, and I think it should be fairly high level. You don't need to include your certifications here when you put your education in your resume. Your certifications can go there unless there's something very specific, but I would include your areas of expertise in programming. So if you're an expert in C++, God knows if that's even relevant these days, but if that's the thing that you're best at, that should definitely go in this summary. So I should mention, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to just chat, put it up on the chat. I'll be happy to answer them. I know there are 8 of you out there, so hi. Actually, I keep talking ahead, but if there's a good point here in the what you should not do, this is slide 13. When you do want to put your objective, where you do want to put your objective is in your cover letter. And a cover letter really should say, I am applying for the position of such and such. And here are the 3 things that you've done in your past that make you qualified for this position. And again, it's going back to that keyword list, but when someone says requires 15 years of experience in X, you can say, I have 17 years of experience in this. So those are the sort of things you need to include in a cover letter. I'm gonna keep going. Your work experience. You're going to create a list of work experience in a reverse chronological order. Your most recent relevant is the most important, or your most recent work experience is the most important, so it's the most relevant. So you go from most recent to oldest. If you took a break in your career, I would just skip those years. I would not create an artificial construct to explain why you weren't working or you don't have a job on your resume for those years. I think the best example I have is someone I knew put that they took they basically went on vacation for a year and they put that in their resume, and I was like, that's not relevant to your work experience. In fact, it just looks strange, so you can skip that. You want to list each job with the company name, your title at the company, and the years that you worked. You definitely do not need to include a description of the company. That's not relevant and it's not important. This is about you, and you need to highlight what's relevant about you for this job. The reason I keep saying this is that the thing that I find so frustrating is when you read a resume, it's just loaded with information and half of it's irrelevant. People don't spend that much time looking at your resume. They make snap judgments when they read a resume based on the first page and usually the top half of the page. That's why your career summary is so important, and that's why that very first, most recent job is so important. Um, Let me keep going. You know, what you want to do. So there's an exercise I like people to do. I'm not going to make people do it while we're sitting here online. But what you want to do is take your most recent job and list the 6 most important things you did at that job. So for an example, you implemented a new procedure, you sold X number of items, you led a product development team for product X, you created and implemented something, you coded for a release of a product. So you want to create these 6 most important things you did. And if you need to, you can sit there and create a list of the 20 most important things you did, but then you can also look at collapsing some of those together. I think people often put redundant information in. So you really want to take a look at what are the most important relevant things you've done. We go to the next slide, which is slide 16. You want to then take each of these 6 items and identify what impact that activity had on your organization. So for example, if you implemented a new procedure, um, you would want to say you implemented the new procedure for XYZ, resulting in cost savings of $1 million, resulting in or reducing costs by 38%. Um, you want to start turning your, um, you really want to take your impact and quantify it. That's probably the best way to say this, is you're really looking at how you're quantifying the impact that you had on the company. You can say, oh, the lights just went out, but they came back. You sold X number of items, generating $2 million in revenue, and you exceeded a quota by Y. As someone who is doing I don't know why that light keeps going on and off. Oh, okay. Deanna's sitting behind me going, no, no, the light will come back. I just wanted to make sure my dog wasn't eating the cord. Um, you can say, you can talk about you generated $1 million in revenue, which may be phenomenal or it may be terrible. But you could say if you've exceeded a quota, you could say, and I exceeded a quota by X amount. You can say you led a product development team for a product resulting in a on-time launch of the product that generated X dollars. You could say that you were the lead person doing the coding, or doing bug fixes, which enabled the product to be able to do a second release. What you want to do is constantly be looking at what was the impact. How did something you do positively impact the organization? So when you do this exercise, you really need to sit and think about it. And I'm sure my contact information is all over the place. So if people have questions as they're working on their resumes, if you want to pop me a question, I'm always happy to answer them. Um, but it's really critical to be thinking about what your impact has been. It's what will help you sell to an organization. So, personal story, when I applied for my last position, they recruited me. I came in, and my boss basically said, I don't know if you're the most talented marketing person in history or just a really good resume writer. And I was like, both. That was my answer. I was both. But the other thing is, when I was showing impact on my resume, every line item, I also had an associated story I could tell about how I did it. So when he would ask me, how did you achieve a certain amount of revenue, or how did you achieve a certain impact, I always was prepared with a story, with something that I could explain that would illuminate how I was actually able to achieve it. One of the things you're really trying to do when you're showing impact is you're implying, and this is what all great marketing material does, is the marketing material is saying, oh, if you can do this, then you can take this and do this for me. So when you think about it, when you show people in a car commercial and they just look like they're having the best time in the world in that car, the whole thing is they're trying to get you to buy the car because then you'll have the best time in the world in that car. It's the same thing with a resume. It sounds really weird, but it's like a car commercial. It's when I read this resume and I hear all these great things that you did for this other company, I want you to come do that for my company. So that's what I talk about when I'm talking about a high impact resume. You want to show how you positively impacted an organization. So if you look at slide 17, you're going to need to create this list for each job that you've done. Um, what you did, what impact it had. You want to be specific. I will say, and this is true of many of the women that I've worked with on the resume side, is men seem to have an easier time bragging about their accomplishments than women do. Women are much more likely to say, well, my team did that. Or, they don't want to sit there and quantify their impact. And I don't know why that is, but I fight with people all the time and I say, no, you have to brag about what you've done. This is the one place in the world that's absolutely terrific for you to brag. But you also need to talk about what you achieved. Not necessarily, you can certainly talk about you've contributed to something, but you need to talk about the parts that you owned when you're talking about your impact. Um, you can say led a team of developers that created XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Um, that's completely an impact. You made that team successful. You made that team accomplish something for that company. So those are words you can use. You can also highlight awards. If you've received an Employee of the Month type award, you can do that and mention why you received it. Received award for, a bug-free month. I don't even know if that's possible. You also want to name drop. So if your product ended up being delivered to someone or you've ended up working for a client and you've done work supporting products that were sold to, and sales engineers do this a lot. You've done work supporting products that were delivered to Microsoft or to Google or something. You can do that name dropping in your resume. And that's highly impactful because, again, people are saying, wow, they know how to work with Google. I want them to come work for me and help me work with Google. Uh, Slide 18 is a list of words to use. These are just some suggestions of action verbs, action words. You're certified, you were awarded, you assembled. These are things that you can these are helpful words you can use. There are lots of lists out on the internet for this, so don't consider these to be the only things you can use. Those are on slide 18. On slide 19, always remember reverse chronological order. Now, one of the questions, and actually, I had seen, and I think it was Rose had said earlier, I believe she believed in updating her resume every 6 months and wanted to know about new trends. So there is a new trend in resumes, and it's an experiential resume versus a reverse chronological order resume, where they're taking things from different jobs and clustering them as different experiences. So, for example, somebody will say, oh, I'm going to put all my programming, and I'm going to just put programming highlights, and then I'm going to just put marketing highlights, and I'm going to put sales highlights. I have talked to a large number of recruiters. They hate that kind of resume. And here's why, because when you have that kind of resume, a recruiter cannot just easily scan it and see how long you've done something for. And it's not necessarily tied to your jobs list, which ends up on the second page of that says, oh, and by the way, I did these jobs for these companies for these years, but nothing's being tied together for them. They're looking for what did you do most recently and what impact did it have and how long did you do it for? The goal here is to make things as easy as possible for the recruiter. Companies hire and outsource this to large numbers of recruiters. They're looking their goal is to get someone hired into that job as quickly and easily as possible. If your resume is at all challenging for them to read or understand, they're not going to bring you in for the interview. So, in terms of trends, there is that trend that people are following that is talking about the experiential resume. It's just, the chronological resume, the reverse chronological order resume, from what I've heard from the recruiters I've talked to, just makes more sense. And I've talked to a woman who owns a recruiting company, and she has told me she hates the experiential one. She goes, I just can't tell what they've done. Um, I think that, and I can say from one of the panels that I did, when we talked about it, everyone's basic thing is they felt that if you did that, if you put things experience, like, here's my sales experience and here's my this, their basic gut feeling was you were trying to hide something. You're trying to hide a gap. You're trying to hide that you did something, but you only did it for 3 months. Um, let's see, what else? You can use fewer bullets as you go back in time. You don't need to have 25, if you have 10 bullets in the most recent job, you can have 3 bullets in the oldest job as long as it's relevant to the job that you want. Uh, you don't need to put months. Actually, months can kind of work against you because people are looking, I've had people who've said, well, I worked someplace from December 2012 to January 2013. I'm like, yeah, that meant you worked 2 months, put 2012 to 2013. It's fine. There is never a question about that. Um, you know, and one of the other questions that has come up is for people who've been out of work, you can put volunteer work on your resume. You may want to identify it as volunteer work. But if you had a role that you were volunteering for, you can put that on there too and say, I was, you did web development work for, Volunteers of America. Volunteers of America, comma, web development, web developer, and identify what impact you had. That you don't necessarily have to say you're a volunteer. But volunteer work is relevant and can be on your resume as long as it's relevant to the job you're trying for. Okay, on to the next slide. Home stretch. This is a thing about things that you don't want to include on the resume. Some of these I've already brought up. Don't include things you hate doing. Bad idea. Don't include things that are irrelevant. If you were, actually, I think a couple of jobs ago, I was like part of the morale committee. I don't put that on my resume. That's so not relevant to finding a future job. Um, Again, personal information really shouldn't be included at all. And redundancies. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, so I am being redundant in this presentation. Things that you've done job after job that are routine, basic work, you can put those into the older jobs, and the example I have is doing press releases. It's kind of assumed if I've done public relations that I know how to do a press release. Uh, what I tend to do is look at saying I put together a complete public relations campaign, which then resulted in this impact for the company. So, but I've done that for, gosh, almost every company I've worked for. So what I also need to do is look at and say, if I did them 10 years ago, is that really relevant? And do I want it to take up space? Or if the one that I did 10 years ago, and I did have a campaign I did, oh wow, in the 1990s, but it had a huge impact. That one I keep in and have a little more detail around because it was such a positive impact piece. But if in my last organization I had not done an impactful campaign, I just wouldn't include it. So again, it's all about editing your resume as well. Your education, make sure it's in your resume. As I pointed out, when they thought I didn't have it, they weren't going to give me the job. I always use the university, the year you graduated, what your degree was, GPA, if that's relevant, and especially for newer graduates, that's very relevant because you don't have a lot of work experience, and any awards that you may have received. I do tell people, even if your degree is irrelevant, and this is the one time irrelevancy should matter, even if your degree is irrelevant to your resume, it's a really good idea to put it in there because one of the things a degree shows people is that you're willing to make a commitment and do the work, for an extended period of time to achieve something. And that's a positive as well. And, I have people who've gotten, have always included my biology degree, and it can be an occasionally entertaining talking point. Certifications, skill summaries, etc. Definitely, especially for technical women, have a certification skill summary section. Make sure you outline what they are. You can list each certificate, who the bestowing body is, and what year you received them from. It can be bulleted or paragraph form. Just make it as easy as possible for the reader to review it. Okay. Slide 23. So you finished your resume, you've written it, it's 5 pages long. Um, this is the point where you go back and you cut redundancies. If you keep saying in every job I did C++ programming, um, you don't have to say it every single time necessarily, but also cut any sort of extraneous fluff out. The sentences do not need to be perfect sentences, but they have to be spelled correctly. The other thing to do is have someone else read it. And this is, I think, critically important for all of us because often you'll miss things that might not have been that hard for someone else. Someone else might have looked at it and said, oh, I see there's this problem right here, or like, why is this sentence here twice? Because sometimes because we're so familiar with it, we don't catch that. So to me, making sure your resume is accurate is incredibly important. I will tell you, and I was tortured at my last company because I would do this, but I would eliminate people who had typos in their resume because it made me crazy. All right. Next slide, slide 24, talking about LinkedIn. Once you've completed your resume, you can definitely port some or all of it over to LinkedIn. You want to make sure everything matches between your LinkedIn profile and your resume. We once had someone apply for a job, and I always go and look at LinkedIn. I always want to go see, oh, did somebody write them recommendations? And what basically came up was that they had a completely different LinkedIn profile than their resume. That it was different and it had different objectives. It said, oh, I want a job doing X, and they had applied for a completely different job with our organization, and they got eliminated because we're sitting there going, there's something wrong here. And if somebody says there's something wrong here, they're not going to take you into the process. All those kinds of disconnects can often send up a red flag within an organization. Definitely realize that people will Google you and they'll check out your LinkedIn, your Facebook, any reference that appears to you online. So make sure that your LinkedIn is up to date and accurate. The other thing you should also do with LinkedIn that I think is so, so critically important is get recommendations. So this is my process, and you're all welcome to go look at my LinkedIn. It's Jerri Barrett, SENS Research Foundation, so you'll find me. When I've completed projects with people, especially external customers, external vendors, partners, colleagues, etc., I ask them to write me a recommendation on LinkedIn, but I also do something very different. I ask them to write me a recommendation that is very specific to what we did together. And those make the best recommendations because what you get people saying, instead of saying, oh, she's the greatest person I ever worked with, what you can go to someone is saying, if you enjoyed working with me on this project, I'd really appreciate it if you'd write me a recommendation about this project, and you'll get something specific like, worked with her on this PR project and it resulted in XYZ, and this was like the best project I ever did. Things like that. So it's really important to have those recommendations. I think 2 jobs ago, well, I've had many jobs, but several companies ago, I was told that people were actively reading those recommendations, and the thing they were looking for was teamwork. They wanted to see if I was doing good teamwork. So it was just such a great thing that I had bothered to ask people to write those recommendations. I can see people are talking, but I happen to have the presentation like right in front of it. Hang on a second. I'm trying. Possibly. Oh no, I got it. No. I just saw this is great information, though. I'll look at it in a minute. Um, all right, references. This is one other item I wanted to make sure I talked about. It's always good to get references lined up in advance, especially if you're starting a job search. The job I have now, they asked for 10 references. I thought I was going to die. Because I sat there going, I have five. So I had to go out and add more references in. But what you want to do is create a reference list that you'll have at hand. Do not hand it to the person until they ask you for it. It's not something that you want to be aggressively, oh, here are my references if they haven't made that buying signal. You can wait, but make sure you have the person's name, the company that you worked with them at, not where they are currently, but where you worked with them so they know which job in your resume it's matching to, what your relationship was with them. Were they a colleague, a peer, a customer, a former boss, their phone number, and their email address. The other thing that you want to do with your references, and since we're on our next to last slide, sorry, we're on slide 25, but the other important thing to do is make sure that you contact your references in advance, tell them that you're doing a job search, send them your resume, and when the reference is coming, when it's coming time and they're actually doing the reference checks, contact them again and say, there is a reference check, here's my resume again, because nobody keeps anybody else's stuff. Send them the resume and send them the job description and tell them what you'd like them to talk about. Remind them because, for example, I had a boss who was on my reference list who I hadn't worked with in almost 10 years. And I said, this is what's relevant in what I'm applying for that I did with you. And remember, I did this and this and this because no one else is going to remember your accomplishments as well as you are. So we are on our last slide, and I have like 8 minutes left. So I'm going to see if I can move this out of the way. It does not want to move. Hey, Deanna, can you come over and help me move this thing? Anyway, I know Rose said something, and I just wanted to see if she had a question. But Jean said it was a good tip on recommendations, so thank you, Jean. That's where it is. All right, so Rose's comment was about the LinkedIn profile, and I will tell you that recruiters are actively trolling LinkedIn profiles because the position I currently have, I actually got through my LinkedIn profile. So it is a good idea to keep that up to date as well as keeping your resume up to date. And Jean, thank you on the good tip on recommendations. I'm a big believer in them. So I think I have something like 28, sadly. So I'm very addicted to my recommendations process. But are there any other questions from anyone else online? What you all can't see is my dog is going crazy next to me. He wants to go play. Anyway, I think that's it. So thank you all very much for coming to Global Tech Women. We're moving on to our very last session. Let's see. I see. Actually, I have two more questions. This is so exciting. Sarabi said, is there a place in the resume for soft skills such as dedicated, hard worker, or personable? That's a really good question. If you're going to put soft skills in, I would put them in the summary at the beginning. Words like dedicated and hard worker are kind of nebulous. They're not, it's actually Deanna just said a really good word. They're kind of cliche. Because that they'll find out when they interview you. They're really looking at you for your hard skills. They're looking at you, if you say, I am a hard worker, they're going to go, everybody says that. Things that are specific are if you've got strong communication skills, you can say strong written verbal skills. But remember, again, it's about impact. So your hard worker is going to be shown by the impact that you've had in the company. So I'd say, I would not put those in. Those are sort of extra filler words that aren't going to get you a lot of bang for your buck. You really want to focus on the big things that have had a major impact. So thank you all very much. I think our time is done, but wait, there's a question from Jean. Hang on a second. Everyone said, I'm sorry, looking at it. Someone over, is there any need to include all the old companies and experience after college, especially if they're not relevant to a current job? No, you do not need to include every job that you've had in the past. Thanks, Jean. That's a really good question, and thank you. You do not need to include every job you've had in the past, unless it's going to, you can all see the light going on and off, unless it's going to leave a very wide gap in my resume. What I would do is go back and you can potentially cut them off at a certain point. Like you go back, like I said, I've been working 27 years. So, I actually do include my earliest job after grad school, because that early job after grad school, I was there 10 years. And the thing that an early job that had a really long duration shows is that I was able to work someplace for 10 years, that I was able to be a dedicated employee, and I actually had a lot of impact. So I wanted to include that. You don't have to include shorter jobs. I normally, as I'd mentioned, I don't include the job I had as a research biochemist between college and grad school, because that was the 80s. That's really not relevant to who I am today. Though bizarrely, I had to put it in because of the job I currently have is working at a research institute, so being a biologist helped. But if you can compress some of the time, or if you end up having one of those years where you may have done multiple jobs in a single year, you can not include all of those and just include the one that's the most relevant potentially. So you just don't want to leave any gaps. But yeah, for over 20 years, you really don't need to have the much older jobs. If you're showing the last, if you had 25 years and you're showing the last 20, that's plenty. So I don't think that's a problem at all. Okay, Deanna, I think we're ready. My dog is attacking Deanna's daughter's food. So I will. That's what's so much fun about online presentations. So anyway, thank you all so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. You all have my email addresses on the thank you. So people will be able to grab that off of online. So if you have any questions, just drop me a line. Thank you. Now what do I do? Oh, okay. I'm done.